the Schnapps Mutiny. September 1788, Emperor Joseph II builds a massive 100,000-man army. Their target? The Ottoman Empire. Their biggest problem? Each other. This army is a linguistic nightmare. Austrians, Serbs, Croats, Hungarians, Italians. Nobody speaks the same language. Most infantrymen can't even talk to their own officers. They set up camp near Karánsebes, and the Emperor sends elite hussars, cavalry across the river to scout. They find exactly 0 Ottoman soldiers. What do they find? A camp of Romani merchants selling barrels of dangerously cheap schnapps. The cavalrymen buy the entire stock, and a massive daylight frat party begins. Later, the infantry crosses the river. They see the party. They want in. The hussar says no. They build a literal fort out of barrels to protect the booze. An argument starts. The language barrier makes it worse. Then, in pitch black, bang, somebody fires a musket. Absolute chaos. A drunken brawl erupts, and somebody decides to be funny, or panic, and scream, "Turks! Turks!" The hussars begin to panic. They jump on their horse in the dark, and they ride blindly back across the river, straight into their own sleeping camps. The camp wakes up to thundering hooves and gunfire. German officers try to stop the stampede. They yell, "Halt! Halt!" But to the non-German speakers, they sound exactly like the Ottoman battle cry. Total pandemonium. Artillery commanders fire cannons at their own men, cavalry slashes at infantry, and the emperor gets knocked into a creek. 2 days later, the real Ottoman army arrives, and they find an empty town, abandoned gear, and a self-defeated Austrian army. An entire military force destroyed by a night's panic and a barrel of cheap schnapps. The invasion of the empty island. August 1943, the Allies assembled 34,000 troops. The mission? Recapture Kiska Island. It's a miserable freezing volcanic rock off Alaska. The weather is a permanent blinding fog. The Allies bombed this island for 3 solid weeks. Naval guns and aircraft turned the tundra to Swiss cheese. They expect brutal, fanatical Japanese resistance. Rear Admiral Akiyama knows that it was a lost cause. He waited for the thickest fog possible, then he pulled a masterclass in ghost warfare. He loads his 5,100 men onto ships, and they slip through the Allied blockade undetected. But he leaves a stage play behind. Wooden decoys, fake shadows painted on the snow with soot, canvas dummy guns, and a literal minefield. August 15, the Allies land. The fog is a total whiteout, 0 visibility. The silence is deafening. Suddenly, boom, a soldier steps on a landmine. The quiet shatters. Troops think they're under attack. They fire blindly into the fog. Other units see the muzzle flashes. They fire back. And for over a week, the Allies fight a terrifying, chaotic battle. They shoot at shadows. They shoot at wildlife. They shoot at each other. Artillery bombards friendly trenches. Offshore, a US destroyer hits a sea mine. 71 sailors dead or missing. Eventually, the Allies realize the truth. The island is completely empty. Over 300 casualties and 0 enemies captured. Their only prisoner of war? 4 shell-shocked stray dogs the Japanese left behind. The silent domino effect. January 1918, the British Royal Navy launches Operation EC-1. It's a massive training exercise. 40 ships leave Scotland. This includes the K-class submarines. The K-class subs are steampunk nightmares. They're steam-powered. They have massive twin smokestack that the crew actually has to fold down just to dive. They are totally unmaneuverable. The crews call them the Calamity class. It's pitch black, wartime condition, radio silence, no lights. Steaming at 14 knots to dodge U-boats. Suddenly, 2 unlit minesweepers drift into the fleet's path. The lead battle cruisers swerve to avoid them. Because of radio silence, they can't warn the ships behind them. Submarine's K-14 tries to turn. It's steering jam. It drifts sideways. The sub behind it, K-22, slams right into it. Both subs are crippled, dead in the water. Then a massive battlecruiser approaches at 21 knots in the dark. It plows straight into K-22. It bends the sub bow at a perfect right angle. Further back, submarine K-4 sees the wreck and hits the brake. But the sub right behind it, K-6, doesn't know that. K-6 acts like a giant kinetic torpedo. It slices K-4 nearly in half. K-4 sinks instantly with 104 men trapped inside it. K-7 crash over the top of the sinking wreckage. 75 minutes, 2 subs sunk, 4 ship crippled, 270 dead, and there wasn't a single enemy ships for hundreds of miles. The Voyage of the Damned. In 1904, the Russo-Japanese War was failing for Russia. The Japanese trapped the Russian Pacific Fleet at Port Arthur. The Tsar ordered the Baltic Fleet to save them. This required sailing 18,000 miles around the globe. They traveled from St. Peter's to Japan. Admiral Zinovy Rozhesvensky commanded the fleet. He had an explosive temper. He frequently threw his binoculars overboard when angry. The fleet was a terrible mixture of vessels. They had top-heavy new battleships, they had rotting coastal defense ships, the crew were untrained superstitious peasants. The journey was a rolling mechanical disasters. Paranoia struck just days into the voyage. The fleet sailed through the North Sea near England. This was known as the Dogger Bank Incident. Russian lookout mistook British fishing trawlers for Japanese torpedo boats. The fleet opened fire in a blind panic. They fired roughly 500 shells over 20 minutes. They sank one fishing boat called the Crane. They killed the captain and first mate. They also accidentally bombarded their own cruisers. The British government was enraged. The Royal Navy shadowed the Russians for weeks. They mockingly aimed their guns at the passing ships. The Russian repair ship Kamchatka was a floating liability. It regularly broke down. It regularly got lost. It sent frantic messages claiming attacks by imaginary torpedo boats. It fired 300 shells at a passing Swedish merchant vessel. The fleet was denied access to the Suez Canal. They had to sail around Africa. They had a miserable layover in Madagascar. Morale collapsed completely. The sailors brought exotic pets to starve off boredom. The warship was soon overrun with monkeys. They were overrun with parrots. Highly venomous snakes wrapped themselves around the artillery gun. The crew lived in terror of their own purchases. The admiral eventually ordered a gunnery drill. The battleship missed the stationary targets completely. They only managed to hit the tugboat towing the target. The exhausted fleet finally reached the Tsushima Strait in May 1905. The ships were encrusted with barnacles. They were covered with coal dust. They steamed into the strait with bright yellow funnels, perfectly illuminated. Japanese Admiral Togo was waiting. The battle was a one-sided slaughter. Superior Japanese tactic and gunnery annihilated the squadron. 38 Russian ships entered the strait. 21 were sunk. 7 were captured. Over 4,300 Russian soldiers died. Admiral Rozhesvensky survived a shrapnel wound to the skull. He became a prisoner of war. The Drunken Invasion. In 1797, the French Directory decided to invade Britain. Napoleon Bonaparte had taken all the elite troops for his Italian campaigns. The government used the Legion Noire for the invasion. This was the ultimate B-team. Colonel William Tate commanded the force. He was a grumpy 70-year-old Irish-American mercenary. He harbored a deep hatred for the British. The army consisted of 1,400 men. A small fraction were regular soldiers. The vast majorities were convicts. They were deserters and political prisoners. The French hauled them out of jails. They handed them muskets and promised freedom. They wore captured British uniforms. The French had dyed the fabric dark brown and black. They landed at Carrick Westad Point in Wales. The plan was to march on Bristol. They intended to incite a peasant rebellion and burn the city. The plan evaporated in hours. The convict realized they were heavily armed in foreign country. They had no actual military guards watching them. They mutinied immediately. They deserted the officers. They spread across the Welsh countryside to loot farmhouses. A Portuguese ship had recently wrecked on the Welsh coast. It contained a massive cargo of rich port wine. Resourceful locals had salvaged the cask. They stored the wine in their farmhouses. The French convicts stumbled upon their massive stockpiles. They drank the port wine. They became catastrophically intoxicated. The military invasion dissolved into a brawling frat party. The Welsh civilian did not rebel against the British. They fought the French. Jemima Nicholas was a 47-year-old local shoemaker. She became the standout star of the defense. She armed herself with a single pitchfork. She marched into the fields. She rounded up 12 heavily armed French soldiers. The soldiers were completely incapacitated by alcohol. She marched them back to town. She locked them inside St. Mary's Church. The local British commander was Lord Cawdor. He hastily assembled a small militia. He had barely 600 men. The remaining French forces were hungover. They were sick and demoralized. The French soldiers looked at the distant hills. They saw hundreds of local Welsh women lining the ridges. The women had gathered to watch the commotion. They wore traditional Welsh dress. This consisted of tall black hats and bright red shawls. The hungover French officers stared through the distance. They mistook the women for a massive regiment of British Redcoat infantry. Colonel Tate believed he was vastly outnumbered by elite troops. He surrendered his entire invasion force unconditionally. The last invasion of Britain ended without a major battle. It was defeated by a shipwreck and a shoemaker.